We are recording. So hi, everyone. My name is Pam Dempsey. I'm the Executive Director of the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting. And tonight we wanted to have a virtual conversation about mental wellness and mental health on the farm, as it is such a growing issue and has been for a long time. It has seemed, though, however, that not many people there are a lot of resources available except for the folks we have on our panel tonight. With us tonight is Brant Houston. He's the night chair of investigative reporting. He'll be moderating this. Marissa Placia, who's been a reporter and covering this topic for well over a year. Adrian DeSutter, who's the mental health specialist and member of the American Farm Bureau Federation. Monica McConkey, did I pronounce your name wrong? And I do apologize. I do apologize. She's the Minnesota Rural Mental Health Specialist, and Ted Matthews, Director of Minnesota Rural Mental Health. So if you guys don't mind, let's do a quick round of introductions. Adrian, would you like to just give a few seconds of you?
Yeah. Sure. Thank you so much, Pam. Can everybody hear me okay still?
Yes.
Microphone's working. My name's Adrian DeSutter, and I married a full-time grain farmer here in Illinois. And we met about 10 years ago, and so I joined the world of agriculture at that time. I grew up here in rural Illinois, but wasn't involved in agriculture until then. And I won't go too much into detail with our story, but we had some events happen in our lives that made stress in agriculture very prominent and very important to us. And when those events happened, we sort of decided to marry my husband's love for agriculture and my background in mental health. I used to be a school counselor before taking time to stay home with my children and help out at the farm here. So we have, in the past few years, really ramped up our advocacy in the ag mental health realm. I do some social media work and presenting and just kind of trying to spread this awareness and spread some education for farm families and different organizations that work in agriculture.
Great, thank you. Monica?
Hi, Monica Kramer McConkey, and I grew up on a farm in northwestern Minnesota. I happen to be on the farm right now. It's a fifth generation farm currently operated by my parents, and my brother and my 18-year-old son joined the farm. So that's exciting to know that he's walking the same ground as his great-great-grandpa walked. So grew up in 4-H and FFA and everything farm related, went off to college and have degrees in counseling and psychology. And for the past 25 years have worked in the behavioral health field, primarily in rural areas in Minnesota and North Dakota. And I guess it's been, well, it was October 1st of 2019, I became Ted's partner in the state of Minnesota. And so right now I see farmers every day, talk to farmers every day. I cover kind of a broad range of geographic area in the state. So I typically go to the farms to meet with them or at a neutral location in their community. And other than that, I do a lot of speaking and training to especially like mental health professionals to help them become more agriculturally competent is how I like to describe it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews. Ted?
You're on mute, Ted.
Hear me now?
Yep.
Awesome. I have been doing this since 1993, working with farms and so on. Monica mentioned that she came on board in 2019. It's great to work with her. She does a good job, and we work together in a really unified way. We work with the Department of Ag a lot, and it's awesome that there's a second person here. I'm really pleased with Minnesota in general and how they're doing things. We have really good hotlines now, and that took a long time to really develop good hotlines. And we have good hotlines here, and they're very involved. And I would recommend to anybody that's listening, if they ever need to make a call to a hotline, do so. But just as importantly, I'd like to have anyone who's listening call a hotline just to see what they do, to see what they would, how they would respond to things. If they call because they're worried about someone, how would they treat that? Because if you wait until it's too late, I think the problem then is you're afraid to call. And if you know exactly what you're going to get now, it's a lot easier if you see an emergency coming about to make that call. So find out what they do. Ask them, call them.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks. Marissa, you want to talk about your work? And you're muted for sure. So there you go.
Everyone, my name is Marissa Plesha. I am a reporter at the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting. I've been working at the Midwest Center for a little under a year now. I started last June, and pretty much since I started, I've been, I know, Pam, it's been crazy. Pretty much since I started, I've been covering this topic of mental health and agriculture, and I've interviewed each of these panelists at one point or another. It's been an incredibly rewarding topic to cover, and pretty much what I found in my reporting and what each of these panelists have told me is that farming is very stressful work, and it's a lot different from a lot of other occupations. Some of the things that make it different, each of these panelists have said to me in one form or another that farming is not just an occupation, it's a lifestyle. And it's a lifestyle that deals with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of uncontrollable factors. It also, let me pull up my notes here, sorry. It's also an occupation that deals with a lot more family interaction than a lot of other occupations, which many farmers have said to me is a very rewarding thing, but it's also something that can at times lead to some family and marital strain. In addition to that, family or farming is something that's often passed on through generations. Oftentimes farmers are taking on farms that have been in the family for many years, which again, many of them have mentioned is also a very rewarding thing, but it can also, you know, pressure and having to uphold this big family legacy. So overall, there are just so many different factors that make farming a lot different from many other occupations. And it really just kind of will add to that stress, and it can add to mental health. A recent CDC study found that agriculture, or farmers who work in agriculture have one of the highest suicide rates. And a recent American Farm Bureau survey also found that 2 in 3 farmers and farm workers found that the pandemic has affected their mental health. They also found that there has been a 22% increase in farmers or farm workers who said that social isolation impacts farmers' mental health. So it is an important thing that needs to be talked about. But that all being said, I've also found a lot of positives in my reporting. You know, I think that there's historically been a lot of stigma when it comes to mental health, but several of my sources that I've spoken with have said that they're starting to see this stigma break down as more and more people are willing to talk about this topic and share their personal experiences. And I think we're also starting to see more and more resources come out that are specifically geared towards farmers, because I think it's very important to have specific resources for a community and an occupation that is so different from so many other occupations, to have resources that are specifically geared to that occupation. So anyway, that overall, what I've been seeing is that while this is a big topic, there has been some improvement, I believe.
Okay. Thanks, Marissa. Ted, I wanted to start things off with you, give you time to unmute. If you can hear me, Ted.
Yes. Okay.
Great. So how many years have you been working in this field, so to speak?
I've been working with farmers since 1993.
Mm-hmm. And how many farmers do you think you've worked with
Oh,
through the years? Thousands?
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thousands.
Yeah.
All across the country. Some of it started off so incredibly slow. And what Marissa said is absolutely true. farmers slowly but surely are starting to get more comfortable with mental health and not looking at that as a dirty word or something they want to hide from. I've just seen some, just major improvements across the board where there's a lot more people that are interested in doing things, and they're doing a lot of right things now. But farmers, once they hear us, then they find out that we're just people who are working with them. We're not these odd folks that come in a suit and tie or dress well and sit down and spew forth the wisdom of the world. We're people who talk to them about their stresses, their specific stresses on farms, and they become really comfortable with all of us. And you notice all of us call ourselves by our first names. It's that you're talking to a person and not an entity. And I think people are doing a really good job now with that concept.
So you've really got the long view of this. How have things changed in terms of the stress that farmers have faced? We went through a terrible time. When was it? In the 80s.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of legislation passed, and things calmed down, so a lot of things didn't get implemented. And then certainly we've had quite a time in the 21st century. We have a great recession, we've had a pandemic, but from your point of view, how have things changed since 93? And are there different, both for bad and good, are there different problems you're dealing with, or are certain problems more extreme? And then how have your strategies in terms of dealing with the problems you hear changed? So one is how the problems themselves, and then the kind of solutions you've had.
Well, the problem itself in farming in general is there's no such thing as a time when you don't have stress. It doesn't exist. And so when you talk about farm stress, people like to identify, okay, it's suicide or it's prices, but I guarantee you, if it's not those two things, it's one of the other 46 things that it can be. So farmers are always under stress. It's just a matter of what direction that goes in. And one of the things that I've really seen over the years, back in the 80s, as horrible as that was, you still had the ability to get into farming if you really wanted to. You might have to work a couple extra jobs, get a few acres, and then buy a few more acres, and eventually you could get into farming. Now, when you're out, you're out. There's no getting back in. And every farmer knows that. So they're risking oftentimes their farm because land prices are such that you can't get out of farming and then decide to go back in. And it's about the only profession I know of that's the case. So they're in a really difficult situation now as far as getting the farm. And that what that creates is, one of the pluses that I see is back in the early 90s, very few young people, male or female, were going into agriculture fields in school. Now there's lots of people that go into agronomy and they learn a lot of things about farming, and that's an awesome thing. The problem is when they get back to the farm, dad doesn't listen anyway. And so there's that conflict between young and old, and how you deal with that conflict, especially when they really do have a lot of knowledge, but you always also have to remember that with young people, they're all looking at how do we make it bigger? How do we make it better? And that's exactly how they should look at it. They're young. We should want that energy from the young farmers to say, we want it more than it is right now. The problem is with older farmers, it's status quo. They don't want to lose what they have. And so finding a way to work together with that is not an easy task, but it's a really important one if we want to go generation to generation. And especially now when dad never, I always like to hear these things about dad gave the farm to his son when he was 47 or 51 or 52. No, he didn't. He couldn't farm anymore. His body was shot. Well, Now, what weighs more than 50 pounds on a farm? So they farm in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Heck, I have a couple of farmers that are 90, which means their great grandchildren will be taking over the farm. And so those are issues that didn't exist in the past that definitely are going to exist more and more and more. And then add to that, with women on the farm, now, if nothing weighs more than 50 pounds, or almost nothing weighs more than 50 pounds, why can't the woman be the farmer? And if they pass it on generation to generation, the oldest, why can't women be that farmer? There's no reason in the world that I can think of other than the status quo kind of thing, which means it will come. It is coming. It just hasn't got here yet. And that's another thing that they're going to have to look at in the future, because truly, there's no reason not to anymore.
So, Monica, you joined this work when, a year and a half ago, 2 years? How?
I did, yeah. I know in a official capacity, I guess, when I signed a contract with the Farm Business Management Program in Minnesota. And prior to that, I'd been doing some farm stress work, but not in a full-time capacity.
But you've been in the behavioral area for
Oh,
25 years or more.
since I was 12, as you can tell by my age, yes.
So what was different when you started doing this work?
Oh,
Go ahead
gosh.
in it. So you've been dealing with families, you've been dealing with stress. Okay.
Yep.
So how did you have to shift gears or your perspective?
Sure.
Talking to Ted and then doing all this work?
Sure. So early in my career, I would have started doing counseling therapy in the mid 90s with primarily with at-risk kids and their families in rural areas. I think what's changed when you look at rural communities right now are there are far more initiatives around mental health, around suicide prevention, which helps the stigma, as Ted was saying. It helps decrease that stigma where it's common. It's okay if you see a counselor or a therapist or you're on an antidepressant, or we have a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but I think with the work done on initiatives in rural areas and really that push for rural health, for health systems to collaborate with mental health care and get those services in rural health clinics, I think that's the biggest change I've seen. You never would have seen a therapist in a medical clinic years ago. You would have had to go to a mental health center or something like that. So I think that's been a really good change just in terms of integrating services for our smaller rural communities.
So just access was
Access,
sure.
breaking, eliminating barriers, exactly.
Yeah. And Adrian, tell us a little bit more how you got into this. You had a mental health counselor background, and now you're suddenly involved with a farm. But what did you recognize that brought you into the field to this?
Thank you. So about 9 years ago, well, I went to grad school and have a master's in counseling, and had been doing that for several years. And but what was really unique is when I met my now husband. So it's been about 10 years now. Not coming from a farm family, jumping into that routine of dating a farmer, which was totally different than dating a non-farmer. But you recognize right away that things were very different. My husband, Drew, our first date was at church, believe it or not. And we sat down at church, and I noticed that his grandparents were sitting a couple pews up from us, and his parents were a couple pews up from them, and everyone was sitting in a different spot. And so after our first date, I said, Drew, do you guys not get along, or what's going on here? And he said, Adrian, I see my family every day. I see them all day, every day. That's part of a family business. So, this is my time to be an individual. And that was the very first sign to me that I thought, okay, things are going to be a little bit different and a little bit more unique. So, that wasn't a stressful component of it, but then you started to see how, as Ted was saying, you have different opinions generationally about how things should be going. We talk a lot about succession planning and how we're going to transition the farm from each generation to each generation and who's going to do what. So, you know, my husband being the youngest generation as on the farm right now, you know, he has ideas of how he wants things to grow. And you know, he had at the time his father, a cousin, two uncles, grandpa, everybody there. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has stake in this. And so we had a lot of family dynamics that were very interesting. Once we got married and had children, those family dynamics became even more interesting because, you know, now I'm a parent and I grew up with both mom and dad putting me to sleep at night. And that's not happening every night here on the farm, you know? So that's something that we had to definitely, and we continue to have to find a balance between that work life and that home life. I think that's been our biggest struggle overall in some of the changes and in some of the stresses is just figuring out how to have a good marriage and how to have a good home life when you have different ideas and different backgrounds on how that goes. And our shift into this advocating,
Yeah.
that happened when a farm friend of ours, a family friend, died by suicide in 2018. Ironically, at the time, I had been looking for kind of a way. I shifted home to staying at home with my oldest child. I was looking for a way to kind of dabble into agriculture because I thought I need to find a place here. I need to do more to be productive for our family business. And we lost a family friend to suicide. And when we were at the visitation, we heard people say things like, you know, what happened? You know, what pushes someone over the edge? And being a mental health person, my husband and I, we got home and I said, you know, that's not how it works. It's not one thing that happens. You know, there's not something that just went wrong. It's a culmination of events. It's a period of time, right? And it starts with stress. That's where it starts, you know, or with a mental health condition or stress that doesn't go managed in a way that is productive. And so we were sitting at our dining room table talking about this, and we kind of both had this jaw-dropping moment where we said, where are we headed? Because, you know, we've got a lot going on right now. We both had some symptoms of chronic stress and, you know, eventually found that we had some mental health conditions in our home. And for us, by the time we recognized that, you know, we were already in pretty deep with this stress and knowing how difficult it was to get out of that, to be able to pick up that phone and find a therapist, even as a counselor, to be able to have that energy to do that. You know, my husband took an entire year from the time he decided I'm going to see a therapist to the time he actually called. It was a full year. So because I, you know, recognized how difficult that was for us at home, I thought if we can continue sharing some of our journey, some of our truth, some of what's really going on in these farm families, make that a little bit more public, then maybe we can start to create some more connectedness and eliminate some of this misunderstanding and some of this disconnect and some of this isolation that everyone has, where we have this stress, but we think we're the only ones. So that's kind of why we're here. And
So I wanted to go back. So this 2018, in addition to coming home and taking a look at what was going on, what happened with the family and the community? Did anyone seek counseling to understand what had happened? Were there any resources at that point that you were aware of? I mean, you had to search for a counselor. And you went to an event where people are saying, what happened? You know, what was the trigger or whatever? And you're going, no, it takes a while. So did the community come to some better understanding of what had happened or how it happened? Or did they have any opportunity to do that?
I think anytime there's a suicide related to agricultural or not, when you're in a rural area, your community is going to come together because they know this person. This person was on their bank board. This person was, you know, part of their church. So, you know, that person impacts not just their own family, but it's an entire community. Right. So yes, you have an entire community that are looking for answers that sometimes just aren't there. You know, the answer of why something happens the way it does isn't necessarily there. And as Monica and Ted have said, I think that the stigma around mental health has been something that has gotten much more spoken about in the last few years. That said, we very much have a long way to go. There's definitely a lot more because in my local communities, you know, I'm it right now, you know.
So there really wasn't. I mean, it wasn't like you can come to church for a counseling session. We would talk about the trauma of this. There wasn't necessarily a professional anywhere nearby.
No, and the thing is that the resources are there as far as, you know that there is a clergy member, that if you have if you can go to a clergy member, you can go to a therapist in a city nearby. You know, we have therapists probably about 20 minutes away would be probably our closest therapist. So we're in a unique situation where we've got enough city nearby that there are some resources there, but people don't always know what those are. And when you don't have a mental health background, you don't know how to seek that out. You don't know why you should seek that out. You know, when they go through loss and tragedy, they don't always even know that a therapist is someone that they should talk to, because people are just very far removed. And again, especially in a rural area where you don't have someone right nearby that's doing some type of awareness or handing out brochures or something like that, it is difficult for people to really understand what resources are really available.
So Ted, what's been the strategy that you've had, and operationally, how have you gotten the word out? If you're talking to somebody in a state that really hasn't started to deal with this as directly as you guys have, how do you get that word out? How's it incrementally happen? What do you do?
Well, we do a lot of trainings, and one of the trainings that we do is with clergy and social workers, and because most of them really want to know what they can do, but don't know what that is and don't know how to organize it and don't know. But if you ask most clergy and most social workers, would they be willing to help? I can't remember too many times I've heard them not say absolutely. So we have those, and we are in Minnesota. We've done a few trainings, and we definitely plan on doing a lot more, and getting the word out. The reason I think it's so important that, sometimes a clergy person is better than a psychologist. It just depends on the situation and what they need. And the idea that everybody, mental health means you have to get so bad that you have to see a psychologist. That's a foolish concept, and far too many farmers still believe that. And it's not true. If you can talk to a neighbor, maybe you'll never have to talk to a psychologist, or talk to your spouse, or whoever will listen. The key is always in understanding how farmers think. And the worst psychologists on the planet are the ones who assume they know and the farmer doesn't. And I hear that. I've heard, and I'm sure everyone on the panel has heard the same thing. They've gone to psychologists where they said, well, I went there and it didn't work. I went there one time and it didn't work. Well, it didn't work because the psychologist was telling them instead of listening to them. And you have to understand how farmers think in order to be able to help them. And if we can train a lot more people, the stigma, for one, will go away, and for two, it will really unite the communities more, because it's like a we instead of an I. Churches oftentimes, they have ministeriums now. I can remember a time when, if you were a Lutheran, you better not talk to a Catholic, and if you were a Catholic, you didn't talk to anybody except Catholics. Well, now they have ministeriums, and they're doing so much more now to spread the word of their religion and their right to feel what they feel, and so on. So I just see all of those inroads. They're getting better and better and better, and frankly, we're seeing a lot of healthy people wanting to get involved, and I think that's just an awesome thing. And we definitely need a lot more therapists and a lot more psychologists, but more than that, we need to teach people how to listen to each other so they can get things done before it's too late. Far too many farmers have this attitude that, I'm not crazy, and the real concept is I'm not crazy yet. You know, it's like you don't have to be crazy. You can work on those issues way before you get to that point. And that's what all of us are trying to spread the word for. So it doesn't get so bad that you go out into the field and shoot yourself, or you get divorced, or because you waited until you really needed the help. And I more and more and more I'm seeing that they're accepting that. And you know, one of the differences in 1993, when I started working with farmers, I talked to about 95 men to every 5 women. Now it is absolutely just as many women as men, because they're involved in farming, they're involved in farm life, and they know they are, and they know they're important, an important component. Whereas in the past, that just wasn't the case. It was like he had his job, she had her job, and now they're understanding that 2 heads are better than 1, and I think that's going along quite well, actually. Slow, but it beats the heck out of not going at all.
So Monica, when you came into this, what were the differences that you had to understand? Maybe you already knew, but what were things that you learned that it was different within the farming community than the work you've been doing before? Were there significant moments of learning of where you went, oh, okay, I see, it's better to approach it this way?
Well, actually, I've lived this life my whole life.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that was a distinct advantage for me, was that I grew up remembering walking in the house um, with mom in tears saying we didn't get our operating loan in the 80s.
Mhm.
And I grew up, working next to both grandparents in the fields, and um, grew up seeing livestock get sick and die when you knew you couldn't afford that loss, and tornadoes coming through and demolishing your farm site, and fights with neighbors over land where the line is, and you name it, regulatory agencies coming in and telling you what you can do and what you can't do on your land. And so it was like coming home for me to start
Mhm.
doing this work.
So was it much of a transition though? You're dealing with kids, but you just were able to take that knowledge and slide it over because
Oh, sure.
you knew the community so well?
Yeah, and my work with kids was early in my career, and then I transitioned into some other positions of more in leadership roles, but have been around adult mental health for a long time.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel like just my combination of being in rural areas, of understanding the mindset of farmers and the uncontrollable nature of the stressors they encounter was priceless in doing my work. And I feel like it's so helpful for me to be able to speak the language of farming
Mhm.
when I'm meeting with somebody. And that's where our challenge is with training, like Ted was talking about, training others to be in these helping roles, is just have a taste of um, the unique stressors that producers face, so you have a better understanding. They can't take PTO, they can't have respite and go away for a weekend all the time. They certainly can't move. There are just a lot of things
So
that
you
are
really have a
different.
list of things for the people you're trying to help to realize that they may not realize from their own life. In other
Well,
words,
they know it.
no, I'm talking about the people you're training to help.
Oh, yes,
So
exactly.
you
Yep.
practically have a checklist, like, this is not on your list, but let me tell you,
Right.
it's on the farmer's list
Yeah,
in terms of
that's
stressors.
exactly right. It's a very different lifestyle. You take for granted things that a farmer has on his mind every hour of every day.
Did you
So,
find the same thing, Adrian? And that you did have to transition how you were doing your counseling, right? And also you were starting at home.
As well. So for me, I was a school counselor, so I focused solely on students, which was very interesting because, and I found it helpful to be dating a farmer at the time because I did encounter several times with students who, one in particular I can remember, he was 16 and he found out that he was not going to have a space on the farm, and he had spent his entire life assuming that he was going to be coming back. You're staying home and farming. So he hadn't done any career exploration. He hadn't put any time into wanting to get a good ACT score or, doing a lot of college searching because that was something that he assumed would be, for him. And that communication isn't always there. Often isn't there, on family farms of what the plans are for the future. So yeah, I think what I learned as far as being a therapist versus living with a farmer and understanding the stresses, yes, things are very different. I remember when I learned first that farming was one of the most stressful occupations, I thought, now wait a minute, I'm a school counselor. I think that's probably the most stressful occupation, right? And we all think that. We all have stresses in our occupations. How could anything be harder than this, right? And I still, hope that everyone has stress, but what's so unique about farming is this combination, this perfect storm, right? And I think we've talked about several of those things, those uncontrollables. I think financially, you do the best you can, and you can still end up negative for a year, And for me, I can do the best I can as a counselor, and even if I get fired, I can go get another job, or I'm still getting my paycheck, right? In farming, it's very different. So there's just a giant dynamic with that, with financials. When we're talking about therapists, I remember my husband coming home after the first couple sessions with his and saying, I don't know if this is for me, because of the same thing they're saying. The therapist is saying, well, can't you do this? Can you try this? Can you maybe leave the farm a little bit earlier, or take a vacation on the weekend, or do more resting, or, try and exercise? And not that we can't fit some of those things in, because we do need to prioritize those things, but she wasn't speaking his language. And he did not feel that she understood where he was coming from. And that's what we really need, right? We need to feel understood. And farming right now is an occupation that is very misunderstood. We are attacked at all angles right now about, the way we treat our animals and the climate things that we do, that we're involved in. So it's a very misunderstood place to be anyway. But luckily he's married to a counselor. So I told him, hey, let's pop out and try a different one. And it ended up being a really great thing for him. He was able to feel much more comfortable with someone different. So I do think that there's some validity to that. And I'm really glad to hear what Ted and Monica are doing. I know at the University of Illinois, they're working on some trainings as well for therapists in our area. So I'm super excited to be working with some people there on that training. American Farm Bureau has a rural resilience training already that is open to anyone. Anyone can take it. And I'm pushing that we can get some more professionals, whether it's therapists, doctors, whoever, clergy, to take that training as well, just to kind of get some basic understanding. But I think more than anything else, we really need to remember that the biggest resources in helping people and in helping farmers is not necessarily the therapists and the clergy, it's us. It's our neighbors, right? It's our friends, it's us. We are the front lines. We're the ones seeing when our neighbor down the road is stressed out. We're the ones that are noticing the changes in the behaviors in our spouses, in our aunts and uncles that farm with us, in our colleagues, our friends at church, that aren't showing up anymore. So we're the front lines. We're the ones that see those signs of crisis. And so we're the ones that need to make sure that we're stepping out of our comfort zone and talking about that with them, and not waiting for someone to ask for help, but making sure that we're creating a safe place for them, a safe conversation for them to get the help that they need, or just to vent, because a lot of times that's what it is. But we need to do a better job of making sure we don't focus on this lack of resources and become the resources ourselves.
So back to you, Monica, because a lot of people here aren't familiar with the training, what different kinds of training, not a lot of details, but what kinds of training are available? How long does it take? What do you consider a successful training session? Just give people a broad idea of what this training's about.
As far as training with other mental health professionals?
Yeah, and
Okay.
clergy, and
Yep.
all the
Yep.
alliances you're trying to build up, since you can't be everywhere.
Right, right. Well, I think all of us do it a little bit differently, probably. But when I train groups of mental health professionals, they know the therapy, they know the counseling skills, those kinds of things. So it's really just like with any other cultural competency training. It's helping them understand the unique nature of this group of people. And so I even call it agricultural competence because it is very unique. And so we talk about all of the uncontrollable stressors in a farmer's life. We talk about kind of the nature of farming. I talk about the agrarian imperative, which is a term, a phrase, a phenomenon. I'm not even sure how to describe it, but Michael Roseman in Iowa, who's a psychologist and a farmer, developed this or coined this phrase.
Oops.
And it really talks about that innate need that a farmer has to hold on to the land at all costs. So they can be injured. I mean, some of the farmers I work with can barely get down off the skid steer and they are going, and there's not a thought about quitting at all. But it's that innate need within them to hold on to the land and to hold on to the legacy of the family farm at any cost. Injury, health issues, relationship issues, they just hang in there. And so I talk about that because I think that's the core of understanding the passion a farmer has for his work. Um, and so, yeah, just many different things that make farming unique. We try to touch on. I even encourage them just log on and listen to the markets one day. Just listen and just get a feel for what they're talking about. Pay attention to what's growing in the fields around your community. What are the seasons like? When are people busy and when are things harvested? And just get a feel for the nature of the work. Same with go visit a dairy and see where your milk comes from and all of those things. It's like get a hands-on look at it if possible. So I try to just give them a taste of the life of farmers and the mental toll that it takes. And then we get into things like just working on, for therapists especially, working on how to help them with their thinking and their thought distortions and how they can reframe and focus on what they can control and take care of themselves. And so lots of
So,
stuff.
yeah. So Ted, how much has the training changed, or has it, since you started doing this? I think you're still on mute.
Okay. I think it's changed quite a bit in that I've had a lot more psychologists call me and want to ask me questions, whereas in the past, they never thought that there was a question to be asked. And I'm not as kind as the ladies on the panel here. And when I work with psychologists, I tell them to shut up and listen, because psychologists have this need to tell you what they know. And it's like, no, you need to know what I know. I'm a psychologist. I can teach you something. Shut up. And it's innate in psychologists to spew forth their wisdom. And so to get them to listen, you have to sometimes be really brutally honest and just say, shut up. And when you do, good things usually happen. And with the trainings and how they've evolved, I think that one of the biggest problems that I see with therapists outside the farming community is in I'm not going to call it marriage counseling necessarily, but family dynamic counseling, where you've got husband and wife are arguing with mom and dad, who's arguing with a brother, who has a cousin who wants to buy land, who and you've got all of those disputes, and every one of them has a right to their opinion. Every one of them wants to do something to make that farm better, stronger, look different. And so, you know, there's no bad guys in this, but boy, the differences. And then with marriage counseling, the you know, the in-laws usually are the outlaws. They're the ones who get treated the worst, and they've got all kinds of issues that, you know, what about their opinion, you know? And so there's so many dynamics in that area alone that we need tons of help with.
Yeah. So I wanted to see if there are any questions before I move on to talking about what you think will happen over the next few years. Do you see anything, Pam?
At the moment, nothing in the chat, though. If someone has a question, feel free, take a moment, unmute, even open up your video and ask away.
Okay.
But right now we do
Okay,
not.
so I'm really interested in how you think things are going to evolve. I think can kind of guess at it, but I'd like to hear first from Adrian, what's going to happen in the next 5 years? I mean, for all these troubles, it sounds like it's getting the attention it should now. How's this going to grow or change? Do you hope?
I mean, I think as we said in the beginning, that the stress of agriculture has always been there. It's been there for decades. We've seen high rates of farmer suicides for decades. We've seen high rates of farmer depression, anxiety, stress, all of that for decades. That's nothing new. And it's going to continue to be a roller coaster. So the stress is always going to be there in some capacity. We're always going to have uncontrollables and weather and things like that that are going to make a giant difference in each farm's business. So that part, the stress itself is not going to change. Now, what we're going to do about it, that's where we're seeing a lot of growth. That's really exciting. We've already kind of talked quite a bit about that disconnect between farmers and therapists and how we're starting to see some of that change, and that's wonderful. We've also started to see some change in legislation. There's been some monies put forward for grants for different efforts and things like that, specifically in ag mental health, and so that's really exciting. I think what is neat from my journey, because I don't work often directly with therapists. I've worked directly with clergy, but I work a lot with farmers and with agricultural leaders and with organizations and farm bureaus and things like that. So what I'm really enjoying is the growth in people and organizations' comfortability with the topic, their desire to want to learn more, and their desire to want to figure out how we can make changes and really prioritize our farm families. So I intend to see that continue to grow. I know when I started advocating again in 2018, the growth from 2018 to 2021 in my own advocacy business, whatever you want to call it, has grown exponentially. I know Monica and I have talked about that a little bit. You start off with this interest in it, and it turns into a giant demand. And so it's a bittersweet thing. We don't want to see that people are having stress. We don't want to have these conversations, but we're really excited to see that people are ready to talk and that people are ready to find solutions and work together, rather than, digging ourselves further and further into that hole.
And Monica, what do you think? What have I not asked in terms of how this will change in the next few years?
I can tell you what I hope will not happen, that I think is a trend for us in the United States, that we are so reactive that when there is a crisis that looms, we recognize it, we talk about it, we talk about funding it, funds get allocated, then it takes some time to distribute the funds, and then we're into the crisis however long. I look at places like Australia or New Zealand where they have farm support, farm mental health programs that are sustained through high commodity prices, low commodity prices, you know, good weather years, bad weather years, that program is there. And I think TED is an example of how that could and should happen. That his position has been there for, you know, years. Um, what I worry about is, okay, if we have commodity prices bounce back a bit, maybe not to where they were in 2012, but maybe in that direction. I already saw a report that farmers actually made money in 2020, and a part of me is like, oh great, that's gonna be a justification for somebody to take the spotlight off of farmer mental health, because it's not about money. I mean, they can make money and they're still dying by suicide. They're still getting divorced at high rates. The farm youth are still under incredible stress. So I could say, I hope that even if the ag economy improves, that we don't let go of these really good things we've built um, through this latest downturn. Because it happened in the 80s, and great programs were started, and then they were, you know, some of them were just completely dismantled, and then we're reinventing the wheel every time instead of sustaining. So
So Ted, what was the magic that allowed your position, your work to be sustainable?
Well, first of all, you have to be a self-starter. You have to have passion for what you do. And if you don't have those things, you're just not going to be successful. This isn't about sitting in a clinic and having people come in and do 45-minute hours. It is totally different than that. So to make it happen, you have to kind of be a jack of all trades. You have to be able to train people. You have to be able to be a good listener. You have to get out there in the community. You have to trust the process. One of the things, you know, Monica was talking about funding and so on. One of the things that I always worry about is not when they have money and distribute it, but who do they distribute it to? I mean, are they distributing it to people who are going to work with farms, or are they distributing it to people who say that they will work with farmers? That's not what I want. I want people who actually work with farmers, not people who say they will work with farmers, because and I see that far too often, you know, and so my hope is with this funding that's coming about, they use that money wisely, because if they do, I think it's a great boon to farm mental health if they use that money wisely, and I just pray they do.
Okay. We had something in the chat, Pam. Was
Yeah,
that
we
a
have
question?
a question from Ray Atkinson.
Mhm.
He says, stigma is such a powerful factor in farmer mental health and really difficult to measure. How can we know if we are having an impact and making a difference?
Go
when
ahead,
the
Monica.
I was
And
going
then
to
I'll go
say,
to
when the
Adrian. I want everyone to answer this
Yeah.
question.
I was just going to say that when the conversation at Cenex in the morning, when the guys are having their coffee, not only includes that they're going to the doctor for aches and pains, but that they're seeing a therapist for anxiety or depression. That's when we know it's gotten to where we want it to be. You know, apart from that, I think just the utilization of programs that exist will tell us that there's a decrease in stigma, because that means people are reaching out for help and talking about or calling the hotlines. I know I met with a gal from North Dakota, and they have a program, and they were shocked that farmers didn't just flock to it. And we all know that farmers just aren't going to. It's all about building that relationship with them. If you don't have the relationship and that trust, they're not going to come, or they're not going to stay, even if they come once. So yeah, I think we'll know when there's utilization of programs, when there's open discussion out at the auction sales or the, you know, livestock barns or Cenex. And of course, we can't measure that. That's anecdotal. But when it's just more common that we're talking about the stressors and struggles and what we could do about them.
Yeah. Adrian?
Yeah, a lot of what Monica said, I think it begins with that participation. And, you know, when we have a panel or we have a workshop or we have something like that, or our numbers continuing to increase. And as Monica said, these things are hit or miss. You know, we're either going to get people there or we're not, because it's still, the stigma is there, right? I think what we need to focus even more so on, rather than just the attendance in hotlines and in workshops and et cetera, is the stories. Are the stories still there? Because every single time I do a conference workshop or a webinar, or even just meeting with a group of farmers, I do a lot of that, even just meeting with a group of farmers. Every time we do those things, people flock when it's done. They come on up, they send me DM, the instant messages, they send me emails, right? And they come up and say, that was me. Or they say, that was my neighbor, or I have a story about that. And so you start to see, again, this connectedness and this comfortability with sharing those truths, sharing those stories. And I think that's how we know, Ray, that we're making a difference, is because instead of people hearing this stuff and going, ugh, and leaving those meetings, right? They're continuing to come, they're continuing to relate to the articles that I've written and that I know my colleagues have as well. They're continuing to express how much they appreciate it and how much they connect to it. So it's there. It is difficult to measure from, you know, a business standpoint, but it's something that I think the more that we continue this network and build this network of ag mental health, you know, this coalition of sorts, we will know if it's continuing to work and if it's starting to fizzle.
Okay. And Ted, any final thoughts on this? We'll see if there are any questions, but I'd like to get some closing remarks from you and your thoughts on how we know.
Quickly, I agree with what both of the ladies said totally. And I also like to add that, you know, how are we going to know when the rate of suicide is lower, not because we identify something, it's simply because it's lower. And when that happens, I am going to be a very happy camper, because that is a great identification for it's a healthier place. You know, people, when they talk about suicide, they identify all the symptoms and all those things. What I would like to see happen is that the numbers get lower because our communities are more involved. The therapists understand better. We're working together as a community, and we don't worry about all that. You know, how many, I mean, I actually had a senator ask me how many suicides I prevented. I thought that was about the stupidest question I ever heard in my life. You know, the whole idea is that we get healthier, and I think when the numbers go down, that will be a great indicator that they're buying more into this than they have in the past.
Thank you. So, Marissa, did I miss anything? There's only like material for another 2 days, but I really appreciate it.
Summary. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've gotten some great responses, I think.
Yeah. Well, I really thank you all. And Pam, did we have something?
Just a kind of a bit of a response. So stigma is such a powerful factor in farmer mental health and really difficult. Oh, wait, we saw that already. Sorry, that was coming from Nancy. I apologize. Wording is important. Calling a meeting as a stress workshop rather than a mental health meeting is less threatening for a farmer to attend than the subject of stress. Is something you guys have encountered as well, and how you're framing, you know, these meetings and such. And thank you, Nancy.
I'm going to jump in and say, I'm going to go one step further and not even calling it a stress workshop. I think that I noticed when I first started doing advocating in articles and in social media, I did a lot of mental health stress statistics, you know, facts and things like that. But what got people to latch on is the stories and the truths and the what's really happening, right? Talking about family, talking about more things that are relatable. And you're right, mental health is something that it's not relatable to people yet. They don't understand it it enough. Stress is still something that people don't want to come out right and say that they have. So one thing that's been really fun for me is helping organizations create events that are less focused on mental health, but still getting that content in there. One time I worked with a farm bureau and we created an event that was just a celebratory dinner for farmers. And we focused on all of the things we wanted to thank the farmers in the community for. And we had 80 people there, and I did a keynote that was on mental health, but it wasn't advertised that way. So the more we can kind of poke into those, events that are already happening. I'm doing a lot of keynotes with, annual meetings and things like that. The more we can kind of just get in there. I'm going to tell you what, when people hear the story, when they hear the message, they latch on to it. It doesn't matter how old or young they are. I've had so many different types of farmers come up to me and say, that's awesome. We're so happy to hear this. And I think however we can inch our way into these conversations is definitely it's kind of tricky, but once we get in there, it really makes a difference.
Anything to add on this? Okay.
Great. I actually have an additional question, if
Yeah.
that's all right.
Yeah.
Adrian, I believe you mentioned that the best resource can oftentimes be a neighbor, a family member, someone who doesn't have a mental health background. What recommendations do you have for that person who is hearing a story from someone they're close with, who's being confided in or being confided to? What recommendations do you have for that person?
That's a really great question, and it's something that we all need to know, really. I think, you don't have to be a professional. What you have to be is a caring individual. And you have to be able to listen. As Ted and Monica have said, even counselors, when they teach us how to do therapy, they teach you first to listen, and they teach you second to listen with empathy and without judgment. And so that is the biggest thing I think that anyone can hear is we're not going to wait for them to ask for help, but we're going to bring in conversations, and we're going to listen to really hear what's going on. It's not a time to share advice. It's not a time to say, well, that's not a logical thing to do, right? Or to think. We're just listening, and we're going to share that empathy back by saying, I hear what you're saying. I hear that this weather is really throwing off your day, and I'm sorry about it. I know my husband and I had he one time had to come home early from planting because it was too wet, and he was all frustrated. And I said, well, maybe you should have checked the weather. And that was not the advice he wanted to hear, right? And so here I am trying to give him some advice and some talk. Well, I learned that wasn't going to work. Next time he called with something and he said, it's too hot. I thought I was going to be able to come home, but I've got to work all day. And instead this time I just said, I'm really sorry. I can tell you're stressed out, and we'll be here ready for you when you're ready. And by the end of the phone call, he was laughing and joking with me, so I think the more that we can focus less on the problem solving and more on just being human and showing our genuine care for each other, that's probably a great first step.
Nice. Monica or Ted, anything to add to that one?
Yeah,
No?
I would just agree. I think listening is key. Listening and withholding judgment and withholding quick answers, definitely key.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Pam, anything else?
No, and I think, Ted, you're muted, Ted, if you were going to add to that. It was like you were talking a little bit.
I just, wanted to quickly say, when it comes to we don't have to have the answers. We just have to listen. And the idea that in order to be a good listener, you have to have solutions is asinine. To be a good listener, you have to listen. And I would suggest that anyone who's talking to you, especially if they're talking to you about emotional things, ask them if they're done talking yet. Don't interrupt them, and don't finish their sentence, and don't fix them. Listen to them, and that will go a long way for a healthier communication.
Okay.
Great. Thank you all. If there aren't any further questions, we will wrap up. We appreciate those who attended. Definitely a big round of applause virtually. I don't know what we're doing with that or this. To our panelists, thank you, Brant, for moderating, and definitely thank you for Marissa for putting this all together. For those of you listening, you'll be able to see the recording and share that out. And we do have some resources on our website we'll share out as well. So thanks again, everyone. If the panelists can stay for just a moment while everyone leaves the room, I'd appreciate it. I'm still learning this Zoom etiquette. Thanks, Jeremy and Ray, for showing up. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, awesome, cool. Okay, well, so you guys, I just want to say again how much we appreciate your time. That we are offering a stipend, and I will get your email addresses from Adrian. Adrian looked at Marissa and said Adrian.
Just remember, Pam has 3 kids at home.
Same.
You're
girl.
lucky none of us have gotten that, been called one of the kids' names.
That's true.
Yes, Olivia and Jack, I appreciate it. Anyway, I will send you guys just information. I am happy to handle that stipend however you wish. It could be a check or it could do PayPal, whatever you're comfortable doing. But thank you. We really, really do appreciate your time and certainly have appreciated all of your support this past year. It's Monica, you mentioned something about establishing trust with farmers, and we certainly in the media have, our newsroom, I won't say the media, our newsroom have run across the same, establishing those relationships are so tough, and it's a long haul. These aren't quick answers or quick solutions.
I felt like I was listening to a journalism workshop.
I know.
I've been teaching for 40 years off and on, a reporter all that time, but also teaching. And actually almost all our workshops start with just listen. And I go with what Ted said, just shut up and listen. Let's start with that. And then, after a while, people start to think you are listening and they may trust you. And things start to work out a little better. But there were moments I didn't want to get going on the recording and I just went, oh my goodness.
Well, again, if you have any questions in the meantime, let us know. We'll share this video with you. If you want us to put anything special, like if there's a contact information you want us to put on the video, you can just reply back to the email that I'll send and let me know as we get this polished off. But I can't tell you how grateful we are. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you do.
Yeah, and part of this, I've been involved with the center since we revived it. Having video is such a good resource now, so that people can actually hook in and see people talking about it. They can read our stories, they can see photos, they can see video about it, but to see people actually talking about trying to deal with this, it's very compelling. It just becomes such a good educational tool for us to push the stories out in a way that really matters. So
thank you.
Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Definitely.
Thanks for having us.
No, we appreciate it.
Thanks
I'll
to the
get back
Midwest
to you tomorrow.
team. I see you there.
I also have something I want to add, because I've been talking with all of you, Adrian, more recently, but I've been talking with Monica a lot over the past year. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of your help with my reporting in the last year. This has been a really rewarding topic to cover. So yeah, awesome. Thank you again for all of your help. I hope to stay connected with you guys for any future reporting.
You're a very good writer, Marissa. You're good at what you do.
Do a great job, and I applaud any platform, honestly, that's going to take on this topic, because this is something that you don't have to do. You don't have to talk about it, and you do, and you don't understand how much it really probably makes a difference to the farmers and the farm families reading them.
Thank
Hope
you.
so.
Yeah.
All right.